never know what will happen at Worlds.
The stage is set, the curtain is drawn.
没人能够预见会是这种情况。
This is the game people want to see.
新的王者诞生了
Kaboom! They've lit the fuse.
你看到了吗
They're gonna win. This is it.
Welcome everyone to World's Countdown for the last day of the group stage. There's only 2 spots left in the quarterfinals as the teams in Group D fight for the right to challenge the victors from previous days. And our first game of the day might very well be the most important one. The last hopes of NA FlyQuest look to take down DRX from the LCK. My name is Shox and I'm joined here by Vedius and Amazing as we go into the last day. And you might say, again? Another day of games, but you're not going to be saying that tomorrow when there's 3 days without Worlds and you don't know what to do and you're running up the walls. So let's take it all in. I'm ready. How about you guys?
Yeah, I'm ready. I cannot wait to see these quarterfinal draw-ups. I'm looking forward to seeing how the rest of this group is going to play out. And can the NA final hope come through for FlyQuest? Can the upsets happen? We saw some cool stuff from Team Liquid. Maybe we can see it from FlyQuest today.
Yeah, I mean, I think they got a good shot. I don't even see it as much of an upset, like at all. At least when it comes to DRX. But I'm also, I guess, trusting Power of Evil to perform as he did last week.
Oh, well, we'll see. Indeed, our final group does have the LPL powerhouse TES on top at 3-0, with the rest of the teams falling in a cascade below them. DRX, FlyQuest, and then UOL. We'll talk at length about Group D, but first, let's look back on what happened yesterday in Group C. Gen G Esports locked that first seed. Fnatic ended up falling to 2nd place after that final game, and TSM and LGD were eliminated. It has been big news, and there's been a lot of chatter from the fans, and understandably so. The first seed from the LCS didn't manage to pick up a single game, and TSM exits the group stage with an 0-6 scoreline. Now, that's just brutal.
Yeah, personally, I think that it is like an unacceptable level of performance from a first seed representing North America. I think that we've seen multiple times in the past an ability for teams to upset and create growth throughout group stages, and I think that that's something that TSM has severely lacked. And I think that the NA analysts have been a lot more critical than probably many of us, and I think that the disappointment is very much felt because we did not get to see any of the TSM that made that run through playoffs here at the World Championship.
Yeah, we have to contextualize their performance a bit though. Like if we think about the regular season, they came in 4th, so the best of 1 play wasn't actually that dramatically good. And then obviously coming in, their whole play was kind of focused around top lane. Every single team at Worlds kind of is able to play around top lane to a certain extent. So all of their strengths were kind of negated, and it wasn't like they had anything to fall back on. So the adaptation is something I would criticize them for, but also we shouldn't have had that much of an expectation coming in, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so, but you can't do anything different when you have a first seed, because you look at that amazing run, you see them falling down to Golden Guardians in the playoffs, then getting back up and really fighting their way back. And I think the main takeaway here is we didn't see that much fight out of them, which is what most fans would have expected.
I think that is a disappointing part.
In that. And yeah, there's nothing more to say about that unfortunate exit. There's still a chance for NA. FlyQuest is on the docket today, but yesterday that did leave Gen G and Fnatic fighting for the #1 seed in the last game of the day. If you wanted to watch it back, just watch the first 10 minutes and you can turn it off after that. It was a stomp. Gen G ran over them, and it was kind of an odd draft coming out of Fnatic as well.
Yeah, they definitely seem to try something a little bit different compared to what we've seen before. The Lulu as an answer to the Lucian was definitely an interesting one, but honestly, early game, I was kind of optimistic. Things are looking pretty promising, especially after Lulu got double buffs, but then on your screen, you saw the Lulu getting solo killed, the bot lane dying 2v2, and then while this was happening, top lane getting massacred as well. So very quickly, this game kind of dissolved into a very poor state for Fnatic, and Gen G were able to just steamroll over.
Yeah, I don't think the experimentation stopped in the draft phase. It actually kept on continuing throughout the game, where they tried to make some plays happen and didn't quite work out for them. And I don't think that they were quite focused on winning that one as it felt. And it seemed like they were actually trying to experiment overall.
We're going to listen to a Reckless interview later, but I did gather that he said, well, this was kind of our last chance to try something. And I'm just sitting here like, you saw that from G2 as well, and now you did that as well. Is that really something you should do, Amazing? I mean, you've been in those games. Is that the time to experiment.
No, the first seed of the group is so important when it comes down to it, because you basically have a weaker pool to choose from, basically, which opens are going to be there for you. So I think that in itself is just a lot better for you, and also puts fear into the opponent's hearts when it comes down to it. Because if you run in with a 5-1 record against other Korean teams too, if you think about it, they will suddenly have that kind of respect for you. And I think that is really, really important when it comes to best of fives.
That's a great point. We're going to dive into possible quarterfinal matchups in just a second. But one highlight from Fnatic's run to the quarterfinals was Bwipo's huge TP play, which earned him the Red Bull top play of the day. That bear is going to maul some people, Vedius.
Yeah, it was fun to watch. Funnily, because in this game, a lot of top lane action wasn't happening from Bwipo.
Yeah.
He was not actually getting involved in a lot of the bot lane skirmishes, but then the one time that he does TP in, double kill, almost immediately, and that's really where Fnatic started to get a huge amount of momentum in that matchup as well.
Yeah, he has been really crucial for the play so far. Like, all of his bruiser plays have also been impressive, but it's also that he always finds a way to be effective in any single game that he's in. So, I mean, we talked about so much about Hilly and Bwipo kind of being the X factors for the team, and I think he's continuing to actually prove that he belongs up here and belongs amongst the best top laners in the world.
And what about the Volibear? We didn't hear that much about him in the top lane before. Obviously a viable pick, but now it seems to be that it's becoming a very, very good pick on top of that.
Yeah, it seems to be mostly picked into Camille. That was at least the Chinese approach to begin with. I think now the pick itself becomes more and more like, I mean, general, I would say, where it's picked blindly, partially too. I still would prefer it more or less as a counter pick to Camille, but honestly speaking, if you get at the champion and you can make laning phase happen like Bwipo did, I think you can always pick it.
Let's see what happens there. And as teased a little earlier, for more on how Fnatic's day played out, Locke got up with Reckless to get his thoughts going into the quarterfinals.
And no Fnatic second week drama this time. I mean, the road was actually easy for you for once. So how does it feel to get the second seed, get out of groups in an easy way, not a Fnatic way?
It feels strange. I was kind of worried actually going into today, because normally we go in with a negative record or basically a scenario where we have to win every game to make it out, and then the energy is very high, and it's quite easy actually to play the games. I prefer much more that scenario than the one we were in now, where we have 2-1 in our backs and we kind of don't have to win all of our games. I think it's a bit scary. So I was actually really worried for example, for the TSM game. I felt like they were in the shoes we were usually in, and we were kind of not in the ones we are usually in. So I was a bit scared, but I was happy to see that we got that win, because I think that was the most important one. After that, it was much easier just to play the day out, and I am happy we managed to pull through. It's an amazing thing once again to be here in the top 8 and have a chance of taking the trophy. I
can imagine, and I'm looking forward to see you guys facing the other teams waiting for you, because talking about this, you get second seed, which means that you're going to have to face either Damwon, Suning, or Top Esports if they come first tomorrow. So any first thoughts on these opponents?
Obviously, it's not an easy road, but I feel like if you ever want to get the trophy, it's not going to be an easy road. I can't think of a single Worlds where a team has won with just easy best of fives. I think it's always been a banger one way or the other. So I don't mind it at all. If anything, I'm actually quite excited. It would be fun, for example, to play Jackalav again and get some revenge from 2018. So I don't mind it at all. I think it's great fun. If anything, I'm maybe even happy that we don't have to play G2, because I feel like when you go to Worlds, the last thing you want to do is play a team from your own region. So I'm actually quite happy about it. I didn't want to get seeded into them.
Agreed. Only exciting matchups ahead, but Reckless, thank you very much for the interview, and we will see you next week. Congrats on advancing to quarterfinals.
Thank you so much. See you next week.
Well, I can think of a world champion or two that had an easy matchup in the final, at least, to get their title, but that's neither here nor there. Just joking. Reckless seems in good spirits, and that's good to know. He says, you got to beat everyone, and we dodged G2, so that's a good thing. However, the quarterfinals do look incredibly stacked already, and I wanted to take a bit of time to think about possible matchups and also LEC's chances with those two second seeds.
Look, for me, honestly, I prefer Fnatic's chances overall because I do think they match up better with most of the teams. I think obviously dream matchup would be Suning to me at least, because I do think that I mean Fnatic can always lean back and kind of scale to a certain extent, but they've also shown the ability to early aggress, and I think Selfmade matches up pretty well with SOFM, so that shouldn't be an issue. And overall, Nemesis has been stepping up, Reckless has always been there, so I don't see any weakness in that matchup. Versus Damwon or top esports, it could be a bit more harsh coming in. But I still see them as a potential semi-finalist. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
That's different to what I've definitely thought and what we've heard until now.
So I think that when we look at expectations, you look at Damwon, and if we assume that top esports get out as the first seed today, like, yes, they are obviously very scary teams, right? But I think one of the cool things is that JDG proved that Damwon can be beaten. Not easily, but they can. And I think the top esports, pretty much throughout the year, I think have showcased that there are weaknesses in their play that can be exploited, again, not easily. So I think that there is no perfect team at this World Championship. At least I think there are some teams that are very close. Yeah, Damwon is very close, but like the chances are not low. Now, I think that I'm kind of in the opposite camp of amazing, because I think that when we look at the junglers, yes, I think it's fair to say that when you compare Selfmade to Yanko, Selfmade is really set up for success in this current meta. But I think one of the big things that G2 have going for them is the pedigree of their players. I think that across the last 2 years, what we've seen from the talent on this roster is that they are world-class across the board, and the longer they have, the better they become. And in a best of 5, I think is really where you get to see this team shine.
Well, what I said yesterday at the end of the show, I think we can repeat it here. There's not been any tournament where G2 got out of groups and their quarterfinal was drawn that I thought they actually will beat this opponent, or they have a big chance of beating this opponent. It started when they were up versus RNG and completely turned the world on its head off maybe a Perks 1v9 in the last game. There was the MSI where they ended up winning but had to go through SKT. And there was Worlds last year where we can't rewrite history here. A lot of people were saying similar things about Damwon when G2 went into them, and they still went deep and they got there, right? And it seems harder for me now just because all these teams seem to have leveled up. Damwon isn't 2019 Damwon. They're scarier. The LPL representatives in top look even scarier than the ones last year. So it's going to be difficult, but if you don't have Fate, why are you even here, right?
And I think the kind of message that we're sending here is that, like, EU is not favored right now. We do not have a lot of hope or optimism, but I think that we have seen signs of greatness from both G2 and Fnatic. And I think that, as you rightly said, I think the Perks example is a great one. RNG back in 2018. Like, across the board, there are clutch players. And when you really need them to step up, a lot of these players can. And I think that's what I'm most excited for come the best of 5s, seeing some of the European talent showcase why they are world-class players and why they can compete with the best.
So for me, what made G2 last year as strong as they were last year was basically the fact that they were able to adapt in the moment and they could band-aid whenever it comes down to it. I think that was a really unique ability to them. I don't think any other Worlds team had that. Even FPX, the eventual winners, they just stuck by the players that they didn't have to adapt potentially. So this year, though, I would say that Damwon and TS both have that ability. So for me, it doesn't seem to be that unique anymore. So maybe in the best of 5 system against these two teams, it's going to be really, really tough. But I do see your point when they can still like have these individual pop-offs. They have that development throughout the year, where they at some point basically become a really great team. And I think Worlds has always been showcasing them as the potential greatest team EU has.
And now there is a week, right? And don't get us wrong, we're not saying there's big chances or big hopes of either of these teams making it to the semifinals, but we're saying there is a chance, and you have to take a lot of things into account and hope they have a damn good day on the day. But we're going to find out who exactly they will be facing at the end of today. So after all the games have concluded, we will have the quarterfinal draw, and I think it's Tian and Ning doing the drawing. So great in terms of EU history. I'm sure they're going to draw us like a great opponent.
Just sweating.
Thanks for that. So we'll see. Okay. Well, we're not there yet. There's at least 6 more games to be played before we find out the quarterfinal matchups. So we're going to be back with a Group D preview in just a few minutes. Don't go anywhere.
Those two, they had to pick those two.
again. We wanna dose of this right now. It's KDA. I'm a goddess with a blaze. 소리처럼 내 이름 잊지 못하게 loud, 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 loud. I could take you to the top. 절대 멈추지 못해. 내가 끝내주는 bag, yeah, yeah, yeah. And when I started talk that, oh, you know how to react. I'm a picture perfect face with that wild in my veins. You can hear it in my glow, 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 glow. So keep your eyes on me now. 무엇을 보든 좋아할 거야. 다 할 수 없는 대본. 나와 되길 원한 늘 확신해. We got it all in our hands now. So can you handle what we're all about? We're so tough. Let's get it, show you out. Can you feel the rush now? Ain't nobody bringing us down, 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 down. They could try, but we gonna wear the crown. You could go another round, 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 round. Wish you luck, but you're not bringing us down. Go hard, till we get it, we go hard. We so in it, we pop stars. Only winning, winning now. Ain't nobody bringing us down, 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 down. You ready for this?
Let's go.
See, 언제든지 내 모습 매직 단 한 번에 내가 잡아 절대 기죽지 않지. 펴펴 네가 뭘 알아. 견딜 수 없어 원해도 원하는 게 얼굴에 보여. I'm trouble and you running it. I'm so cold. When I move that way, you gon' be so blown. I'm the realest in the game. Said I'm on fire with the blade. You're about to hear my name, ringing in your head like whoa. So keep your eyes on me now. 무엇을 보든 좋아할 거야. We so tough. Let's get it, show you out. Can you feel the rush now? Ain't nobody bringing us down, 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 down. They could try, but we gonna wear the crown. You could go another round, 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 round. Wish you luck, but you're not bringing us down. Go hard, till we get it, we go hard. We so in it, we pop stars. Only winning, winning now. Ain't nobody bringing us down, 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 down. 난 멈추지 않아. Oh, we go hard. Oh, we pop stars. Ain't nobody bringing us down, 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 down. They could try, but we gonna wear the crown. You could go another round, 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 round. Wish you luck, but you're not bringing us down. We go hard, till we get it, we go hard. We so
This group has some of the most fun individual 1v1 matchups. There are some of the most dangerous players in the world.
我觉得D组的中单选手实力都是非常顶尖的，就都是来自各个赛区的顶尖中单选手。我印象深刻的选手可能就 Troy， 因为和他对线的话，感觉他补刀的东西特别多，就他也比较稳健，一位的中单选手。
Destiny Gate available. Is going to come in. There's the Destiny Gate. No paranoia up. Gold card's going to come through. The Knight is going to be taken down.
TOE 这名选手就法师玩得特别好吧，就感觉他法师就熟练度很高。
But Paramelia says goodbye to Oriana.
龙妹子的话，就感觉他那种黑科技比较多吧，就看他入围赛的时候，他就什么无人中单都用了，就感觉想法比较多。
I was super hyped for matchup against Knight and Chovy. It's really good to play against them because no one ever will have that experience from Russia.
With Knight and Chovy and even No Man's, I feel like I never really was afraid of these challenges. Next time I face off against them, I can get a win for my team.
Paramelia against the world. This guy is the whole team.
We didn't expect 0-3, that's for sure. It would be great to have good games, close games, at the end finish them with winning.
1라운드 때 좀 아쉬웠던 부분들이 있었으면 그걸 다 보완하고 2라운드 때는 더 잘하는 모습으로 전승을 할 수 있도록 목표를 잡고 그게 안 되더라도 잘 할 생각입니다.
Doesn't quite do enough damage with Kojic. Gonna kick the cross. Oh, 3 people. That was extraordinary.
今年的期待肯定还是要冠军啊！
There goes Carter and there goes No Man's. Top Esports. 3-0 in their first 3 games and they haven't even looked close.
The goal is the same. We want to win. We want to win every game. It doesn't matter if we are playing against UL or against top esports. We need to just be ready to face everyone and beat everyone.
Yes, Power of Evil, bring it. It's all on the line for the teams in Group D as they fight for the last 2 spots in the knockout stage. The stakes are high already in Game 1. We do have FlyQuest going up against DRX, and here we see the teams arriving at the venue in Shanghai through the lens of the Oppo cam, giving you an inside look at Worlds 2020. There we go. They look pretty relaxed, so that's good. And what's not to love about many of the teams in this group? All of the teams. I don't want to exclude anyone. That came out wrong. That came out wrong. But, you know, there's something exciting in all of them. And it's going to be a hard one. And as always, or like as has been tradition this group stage, the games that might mean the most
1 and 6
are at the beginning and at the end. So FlyQuest versus DRX is going to tell us a lot, as well as UL versus Top.
I mean, if FlyQuest beats DRX, then Game 4 also means a lot. So
that's what we're hoping for.
So that's what we're hoping for. I mean, honestly speaking, I'm a bit higher on FlyQuest than a lot of people, simply because I do think that they have tons of upsides. And I talked about it a bit. I do think that Power of Evil has been a standout last week. And honestly speaking, I don't see the same kind of weaknesses that other people see in them, because they have had that like run throughout the playoffs. They have been able to be stable throughout the regular season and playoffs. I don't think there's any inherent weakness to them, maybe besides the top lane right now.
That's hopeful. I'm going to put a pin in that and pick it up in just a bit, because I did want to look at something that happened last time DRX faced Top Esports. DRX may have not gotten the win, but that's fine, because Pioshik got the perfect Lee Sin kick just to say, I'm helping, presented by State Farm. And beautiful Lee Sin kicks are always something to look out for. So let's see if this one delivers.
Yeah, I think that it was extremely well executed, and right now we're just seeing the setup, and this is where things started to look a little shaky for Top Esports. Even though they had the Baron, they were not able to make good use of it because they tried to force this fight that was not in their favor. And keep your eyes on the Lee Sin, using the Renekton to get the double knockup into the triple play from Carrier. Just beautiful team fighting from DRX. And we're going to talk a little bit about this later, but this is one of the big things for me that I think separates DRX from teams like FlyQuest and UL. Their ability to work as a 5-man unit, their ability to play those 5v5s.
Oh, I mean, he looks like young amazing out there, so happy to see that.
I was going to bring it up myself, but I knew you were going to do it. Like, I want to get back to the glory days, please. Please. Okay, cool. Well, today does have a lot of explosive players competing, so I did want to go down the line and kind of check out who we were all excited about going into this day, because I think it's hard to pick from. But Vedius, who is your standout player you're looking at today?
Has to be JackieLove for me. I think that he has had a phenomenal group stage, and I think that we've only scratched the surface of what this man is capable of as well. He's only played Senna so far in the groups, and if you guys can't see on the screen behind us, 751 damage per minute on a Senna. He's contributing 35% of his team's damage. Like, the guy is just a statistical madman, and I think that he is playing out of his mind in lane and team fights, everything.
What is also crazy is that he does so much damage, but he actually doesn't take up a lot of resources in the team comparative to his other team members. That's always what makes ADC statistics even more impressive to me, like what you do when you aren't given the resources by your team. Amazing.
Yeah, you have to be good in isolation. And for me, it is actually Ignar. I mean, last week he struggled a lot. For me, it was weird to see, because I do think that this guy has a ton of upside. He has shown in 2017 when he was on Misfits. He has shown it throughout the regular season. The addition of him coming in actually made FlyQuest a contender. So he tried to make a lot of plays in week 1. He roamed a lot away from Wild Turtle. I do think that at some point these roams will pay off, and it's necessary for them to pay off. And I do think that this guy is able to make that happen, and he has done so for years now. So I'm looking forward to seeing him play this week. Maybe have a couple of thresh hooks actually land, and then
that'd be nice.
All is well in the world.
Yeah, you want to see him channel some of that SKT best of 5 vibes back in the day. Hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah, but, you know, we'll see. I want to look at the mid lane, specifically at Chovy. I think he's one of these guys with a lot of mystique around him coming out of the LCK, very hyped to come to the international stage. And what is so interesting about him is kind of similar to JackieLove. He doesn't get a lot of jungle attention from his own jungler. He gets ganked a ton, but he's always able to keep control in the lane and build huge CS and then also gold advantages in the early game.
Mental, no?
CVX, all by himself. And that's such a boon to have if you're a team that has a lot of threats. if you just never have to worry about this one lane that's always going to stay ahead.
I completely agree with you, Shaw, because I think that Chovy has proven multiple times that he is one of the best top mid lane players in the world. And I think he's super impressive, and I love watching him play. And we're going to get a rematch of him versus Knight today. It's going to be hype.
That we will. Ignar and Chovy will take to the Rift shortly in the first game. And before we dive into that, Vedius did want to take a closer look at the last time FlyQuest and DRX faced off. Yes, give me some swagger, Vedius.
We're going to go over to the telestrator. We're going to
okay, no, that's too much. Bring it back.
We're bringing it back. All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about exactly what happened the last time these two teams met. Now, in the context of the composition, as I roll this clip out, it's very important that FlyQuest try and get an early advantage because they are eventually going to get outscaled. Something about FlyQuest composition it is very front to back. But with things like Maokai and Kindred, later on these fights were always going to be very difficult for DRX. So these plays needed to happen for FlyQuest, and props to them, they made them work. They punished DRX from trying to set up for the Drakes. They were able to actually get a 2 Drake advantage very early on into the game, and even though they were a little bit behind in terms of farm and gold, they were actually doing very well in terms of the early game. The things where everything started to fall apart comes in this mid-game Rift Tile, because remember what I'm saying, like, they need to try and force fights around the mid-game, around 1 or 2 items, and they need to focus on playing for Drakes. Fly were actually in a position where they did get 3 Drakes, but they tried to overforce this fight. Now, when we have a quick look at the bottom side of the map, you can see both top laners are hanging about, but crucially, the Ornn does not have teleport. Also, what's going to happen is the Maokai is going to push up this wave because FlyQuest have decided that they want to try and fight here. So Ornn is forced to move early so that they can contest. The problem is Caitlyn is also going to be able to push up top, and the objective is starting in the meanwhile. So as the clip is rolling out, you're seeing that FlyQuest want to try and challenge this objective when really they're not in a position to do so. Multiple members start grouping up, and very quickly you can see that the Ornn has managed to make his way up as the Maokai is pushing in the top wave. The Ashe is also forced to catch the wave at top lane, but now you've got the stack for DRX starting the objective. So as this plays out, what you'll notice is that Fly, okay, I think that the play that they can make is Santorin can come over the wall, go for a cheeky steal, or if it doesn't work out, he can then jump back out. But the problem comes from Ignar over here, and you may notice that there's a channeling animation because his idea is to commit onto the backline. So there's a bit of misjointed communication here from FlyQuest as 2 people walk out, he dives onto the backline, and now you can see that FlyQuest have really committed to the fight, but they're split off. You have multiple members focusing on Doran, the main tank. Meanwhile, Ignar's getting focused down, and Zoe is just down here with a really good angle to actually set up a great collapse. So because of this, DRX are in a much better position to team fight, and this is where things fall apart. Because FlyQuest are inevitably going to get outscaled in the team fights, things are not going in their favor as they suffer a huge gold deficit at this point in time. So I think that if FlyQuest were just a little bit more patient, if they didn't try to force this mid-game fight, then they could have played for things like the Dragon Soul, and then maybe there's a world where they actually win this game.
Maybe there is a world in which they win, and we've seen also that, you know, Chovy, but also
now.
the other laners as well, they just make an advantage for DRX kind of on their own, not necessarily objectives, but also huge CS leads. So the fact that FlyQuest can go toe-to-toe is really a good thing. And when it comes to FlyQuest, it's like, for me, it's so easy to cheer for them. They are such a likable team. I think nobody dislikes FlyQuest. I mean, they do stuff for the environment. They all have very likable players. They actually put up a fight in week 1. They are NA's last hope, but when you look at it, they have the best chances. I mean, definitely the other 2 are out, but what I mean is TL ended up playing actually really well in the second week, but it just wasn't enough. TSM had just a bad run overall, but FlyQuest has a win.
Yeah.
So if they win this game versus DRX, this looks so different, but they do have to win. Amazing. And you've indicated that you think that they have bigger chances than we may think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure of the percentage of it, but I do think, as Vedius already put it, especially that Herald was like game breaking. So if that doesn't happen, I think that comp actually looked pretty good when it comes to 2 to 3 items even. They could have played for the Drake Soul, and now we see it in a gold graph where it's 1k difference, and then you see the steep decline when it comes to the Herald play, and that in itself, like making a mistake around the 20-minute mark especially is so heartbreaking in that sense, because you're going to give up the inertia control 2 at that point, so there's so many things that the enemy can play around. I think for me, at least, as long as Mr. Wild Turtle is on a decent matchup, as long as Mr. Power of Evil is on a decent matchup, in both cases, I think they can actually withstand the amount of mechanical pressure that a team like DRX puts on them. It's just up to the rest of the team, like the Ignars and the Solos of the world, to basically make up for the mistakes they have done in week 1.
That's a great point. We also saw domestically they do like stacking their Drake's FlyQuest and working towards that Elder or that Soul. But now they are on the blue side, I believe, instead of the red side. So where do you think the priorities are going to lie in terms of first picking for FlyQuest?
Well, I think that they should prioritize on getting, well, in my opinion, I think they should try and get a comfortable bot lane matchup. But we also know that Ignar likes to roam, and the way in which they were able to beat UOL was just enabling Power of Evil as much as possible. And I think that one of the issues that FlyQuest is going to face, because I am not so much on the hype train as Amazing is, I think that...
We're just positive. We're optimistic. We're optimistic. The glass is half full.
Someone get through.
I think that this is a huge uphill battle for FlyQuest, largely because while I think that Power of Evil can hold his own against Chovy, while I think that in the straight up 2v2, yeah, I can see a world in which Wild Turtle can actually, alongside Ignar, can match up. We see a lot of roaming from Ignar. And then in the way in which DRX answers in the draft is prioritizing things like Caitlyn Lux. So when Wild Turtle is left alone, he's very susceptible to getting killed and punished. And he ends up being these huge disadvantages. But also, in the top side of the map, I think that Solo, while on tanks, looks a lot more comfortable. I think that there are ways in which they can be punished in the draft. And so this is where, like, I'm starting to see, like, more and more holes that need to be plugged up for FlyQuest, which within the week they may have been able to solve, but that's where my biggest concern comes from, because if it's not down to the individual laners, there's potential draft risk, and on top of that, DRX is a fantastic team fighting team.
Yeah, let's be clear here. We are optimistic. I think you have to be, but it is a tall order for FlyQuest. Let's talk a bit more about that bot lane. We obviously focus a lot on our LCS and LEC players, but there's so many legends on that roster already, and I think Deft in particular is a marksman with a great story who's been up against it because he's been on the biggest stage getting the victories, but he's also gotten knocked out in considerable amounts of times, even though he's a fantastic player. So this is really also an opportunity for him today.
Yeah, it has to be. For him, I mean, he has been knocked out in quarterfinals 3 times, if I remember correctly, once in semis, so that in itself is something he probably doesn't want on his resume because he wants to go for the World Championship potentially. And honestly speaking, if you go to multiple teams and you keep on having the same results, maybe you have that pressure on yourself at some point to perform. And I think right now, at least for him, when it comes to the matchups he has in this group, I do think he matches up pretty well, but there are certain mechanical I wouldn't say mechanical deficiencies, but more or less like playstyle deficiencies that he still has and still carries with him, where he's more or less a defensive AD carry, where he's not really like pushing forward. He's not, let's say, a Jackie Love kind of making these crazy plays.
A wild turtle.
He's not a wild. He's not a wild turtle.
He's not a wild turtle.
He's a calm turtle, I would say.
Calm turtle.
Where he's like looking to perform in the laning phase, obviously getting his small CS advantage, maybe 5 to 6 CS, but he's never pushing that envelope too far. He's rather staying in that kind of like comfort mindset, and I think that is something he has to break.
Or wait till Wild Turtle does a Wild Turtle. I think you can look at it from two sides, right?
Also wait for that,
Yeah.
I think that what's interesting there is if you look at the stats, you can see that CS-wise, obviously Wild Turtle looks much more favored because of how hard Deft got punished in the top esports matchup specifically, where he ran his Draven. Didn't go quite so well, but I do think that outside of that game, we've seen a very impressive performance from Deft. And I think that coming into this World Championship, a lot of question marks surrounded his performance and his level of play. And I think that just as a big fan of Deft, it's great to see him live up to the expectations that have been put behind him.
All right, DRX is a fantastic team. It's a tall order for FlyQuest, and if it's possible, I'd like to just give it over to the casters a bit earlier because they're 2 NA voices and we're all LEC. So I'd love to know what Captain Flowers and Azael think about this matchup. So let's send it over to them.